And from now on, we will also start the recording of today's webinar. So, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, How Graph Technology is Transforming Financial Crime Investigations. And my name is Thorsten Stockmann. I'm a sales responsibility for public sector in the German-speaking area, and my partner in crime today is Imran Yusuf, and he's senior graph consultant at GraphAware, and he's joining us today from Australia, and I'm currently in Berlin. So greetings to all of you in Australia and Berlin, and as I could see in the poll, we also have participants from Belgium, the Netherlands. So goedemorgen, dames en heren. And to our guests in France and Belgium and the French-speaking Swiss part, bonjour. And that's all I can do in other languages. Guten Morgen natürlich noch für unsere deutschsprachigen Zuhörer aus Deutschland, Österreich und der Schweiz. So we will start, and first of all, normally we think about, okay, what's going on for today? So why should you think seriously about financial crime investigation? That's the first question I try to answer in the next minutes. And the next question is it even worth the effort you are doing while thinking about financial crime investigation? And we will see it on our next slides. That's one reason is for sure your enemies are using tools like also Neo4j and AI for sure too. So they are in many cases also ahead of you, and that's why every one of us should think about financial crime investigation to not lose money at the end of the day. And that's some funny information I found, and we have it next, that there are regional trends in financial frauds. And the next graphic shows you a nice picture from Interpol, and we see that we have different kinds of fraud, and we have regional trends. And it's in the first moment you think, oh, funny. On the other side, it's sometimes also worrying, yeah, that there is also not only with in the consumer goods space that there are regional trends, but you also see regional trends in financial frauds, yeah, and in such areas. And there are much more areas where we have to take care of. So we see it in the next that we have, for example, insurance claims fraud. We have the topic of anti-money laundering. We have credit fraud. We have digital wallet or retail fraud. We have many others like supply chain fraud, procurement, pandemic fraud. We have seen this during the worldwide corona COVID pandemic situation. We have tax fraud. We are talking to a lot audiences and people from tax investigation and local and federal tax authorities. And so it's not just one ticket, one topic we are talking about. We have different kinds of frauds and see this in different situations. And one comment I really like is from the European Union, or better to say from the European Central Bank. And this is on the next slides. They said graph databases and graph data science reveal relationships and provide answers. And that's very important for me, that we provide answers to questions that investigators didn't even know they should be asking. And this is something, when you hear this from a customer, it makes you, wow, okay, we are really in the situation together with our partners to dive into the fields of financial crime and fraud prevention. And this is you see also a next poll. So what we now like to hear from you is if you have ever worked with graph technology before. And the results are somewhat mixed. Nearly 50%, yeah, somewhat familiar. That sounds good. Not yet, but curious is 25%, and also 25% yes, regularly. So that's a good base for us. Why is Neo4j the right partner for you? Together with today our partner GraphAware. 18 years ago, across the horizon, so it was the place and the date when Emil Ephraim started a nice little business in Malmö, Sweden. That's now called Neo4j, and Neo4j became a very popular and also very successful company in the graph database space. And this is something we are developing on the day-to-day business. And with regard to development, we are an open source company, and the open source is made in Europe. So as you can see on the next slide, our development resources are located in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and in Sweden for sure. And today we are proud to have more than 160 million downloads on our community edition. We have 250,000 developers working with Neo4j, and also being active in our online communities. And we have above 1,700 customers, including also the 75 of the Fortune 100 companies. And currently, and it's still growing, we have a little bit more than 800 employees across the globe. So I was talking about a question, and the next question we will see is, I try to answer, why should we think seriously about financial crime investigation? Because there are trends, and also we see a lot of fraudsters trying to steal away your money. And the next question we can see now is it even worth the effort? And this is something I will explain you now on the following slides. So a really, really interesting question is it even worth the effort? And I want to draw out a very easy example. That's the 3P, how we call it. And you see it with next. We have 3 Ps. The 1 P is the Pandora papers, and this is something we show on the next slide, please. So we have the Pandora papers. I guess everyone is familiar with the 3 Ps, the Paradise papers and the Panama papers. And this is all done by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And this association, this worldwide group, they are leveraging the graph technology of Neo4j together with other solutions for like GraphAware or like Linkurious in these cases. And this information and all the databases are still available on the internet sites of the ECIG. And you can also still today dive into the data from the days when they started investigating in these kind of documents. And Pandora by the numbers is something I will show you just quick on the next slide. So we had in total a little bit more than 600 journalists from 150 media outlets in 117 countries only working on the Pandora papers. The data amount was close to 3 terabytes, close to 12 million files, and the oldest documents are from 1970, and the most documents were created in the 96 and up to the year 2020. And we found out that they are 20,000 shell companies and also 29,000 UBOs, so ultimate beneficial owners. And also a funny thing, 130 billionaires, according to the Forbes list. And also, and it was mostly times also presented in the press, 330 politicians from 90 countries. That's Pandora by the numbers. And when we get into more detail what was part of this 2.9 terabytes data files or data amount, we see on the next slide that we had a lot of documents, images, emails, spreadsheets, presentations, audio files, video files, and other kinds of information and documents and data sources. And it took quite a while to dive into this information, to gather it, and to really read the information out of the documents, out of the Pandora files. And on the next slide, we see a very simplified data model. So it's the intermediary, the entity, the officer, and the address. And you find this data model and also the opportunity and the option to try on your own how to leverage and use Neo4j, for example, with the Pandora data files on neo4j.com in the technical area. So this data is still available, and if you want, you can support the ICIJ also today with diving into the data, and maybe you find some new information. And this brings us to the next slide, and we will see that, for example, with the Pandora papers on the right side, in 2021, a German authority bought the Pandora papers, and the investment was roughly 300,000 euros. And it took them 2 years, and then they had a result of 38 million euro in additional tax income. That's an ROI of 6,400% over a 2 years time frame. So is it worth investigating in financial crime? We say definitely yes. And the nice and beauty thing that's when you today, and I did this last week Friday on the next slide, I checked the ICIJ website, and still you see news and press releases about current investigation successes around the Pandora papers, though the story is still not at the end. And this is for me the first introduction of on the topic. Is it worth doing? And now I'm proud to hand over to Imran, and he will show us what we are really doing, what GraphAware is doing, transforming the UBO investigations based on Neo4j technology, and the opportunities that GraphAware offers to you.
Thank you, Thorsten. Hi, everyone. My name is Imran. As Thorsten mentioned, I'm a senior consultant at GraphAware. And in this next presentation, I'll be walking us through a specific use case within the financial crime world to see how graph technology is being used to tackle real-world problems. Now, I'm hugely passionate about graph technology. It's something that I was first introduced to back when I was working for a large government agency here in Australia. And since then, one of the areas that I've used graph technology for has been to use it to transform investigations into ultimate beneficial ownership, or UBOs for short. And GraphAware isn't new to this space. So we've been around for roughly 12 years now. And we work with agencies here in Australia and across the globe to support critical law enforcement and intelligence and taxation use cases. And we do this through our data analytics platform called GraphAware Hume, which sits directly on top of the Neo4j native graph database. And this allows organizations to take data from disparate data sources and combine them into a single connected store in Neo4j. It also allows organizations to orchestrate Graph AI, and it allows or provides the ability to generate custom dashboards with geospatial and temporal analysis to uncover insights that would otherwise remain hidden. So today we'll be delving into the world of UBOs. We'll be discussing what they are, why they matter, and how they feature in real-world investigations. We'll be exploring a case study to see these concepts in action and discuss how its lessons can apply more broadly. And we'll also be looking at how graph technology is helping tackle the UBO problem. And then before wrapping up, we'll cover a brief demo of GraphAware Hume so that you can see exactly how graph insights come to life in practice. So to start off with, let's open up a quick poll to see how familiar people are with the concept of UBO already. Now, I'll be relying on you, Thorsten, to let me know when the poll is ready and the poll answers have come in, because I can't actually see the poll.
Yes, I will do.
The question is live.
The question is live, yes. Seeing the first results coming in. The number is growing. So the current trend is very familiar, around 40%.
Oh, wow.
Heard of it, but not confident is 26. Yeah. And not familiar at all is 35.
Excellent. Okay. So that's great to hear that some people have already heard about UBOs. For those that haven't heard of the term UBO before, when we say UBO, we're talking about the real people who ultimately own or control assets inside a corporate vehicle. And knowing the answer to that ownership question isn't always so straightforward. So if we take the Pandora Papers, for example, one of the largest ever leaks of financial data ever to be investigated by the ICIJ, it revealed how world leaders and billionaires and bad actors used offshore entities to obscure their wealth. And in many cases, luxury real estate in cities like London and New York and Sydney wasn't owned directly by the individuals themselves, but rather hidden behind layers and layers of shell companies, some registered in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands or Cyprus. And each layer made tracing ownership deliberately difficult, which left investigators having to untangle this web of holding companies and nominee directors and paper-only trusts. And so why does this matter? Well, at its core, hidden ownership fuels financial crime. It's the secrecy that surrounds the true owner that enables things such as money laundering and tax evasion and the flow of illicit funds more broadly, which could be stolen public funds or fraud profits. And this money often flows through businesses and banks and investments, which can eventually reappear into the legitimate economy in the form of assets such as real estate or corporate holdings, which make it harder to trace. Now, the UN estimates that up to $2 trillion is laundered globally each year, and that's roughly the size of Australia's GDP. And I think that this highlights the need to investigate how ownership and control are concealed within complex financial structures. Now, there are three different types of UBO investigations. So we have asset ownership, which is focused on identifying who owns a set of high-value assets. And then we have a related investigation type called ownership structure, which is focused on identifying who owns a set of companies. And then we have legal and compliance, which shifts the focus away from ownership towards control. And to illustrate these three different types of UBO investigations, we're going to look at a case study surrounding a man named Roman Abramovich. So here we have one isolated view of Abramovich's network, which relates back to the asset ownership investigation type. And we're going to see how Abramovich was able to leverage, or allegedly leverage, this intricate ownership chain to sidestep paying millions in taxes on his fleet of super yachts. Now, according to The Guardian and the OCCRP, Abramovich secretly owned two trusts, so Sarah Trust and Neptune Trust. And Sarah Trust owned a series of companies that in turn owned these super yachts. And these yachts in total were estimated to be worth hundreds of millions. And then Neptune Trust also owned a series of companies which would then rent out these yachts, which created this illusion of commercial activity. Now, keep in mind, Abramovich's name wasn't on these yachts directly. And really, these yachts looked like commercial charters based on an incomplete view of the UBO network. And because of this commercial charter disguise, Abramovich was ultimately able to claim VAT exemptions on things like fuel and maintenance. But authorities were able to eventually piece together a completer view of the ownership chain and identify the fact that it was seemingly a closed loop system. And that, in fact, there weren't commercial chartering arrangements after all, but rather these yachts were Abramovich's personal super yachts. And so Abramovich was later hit with a 14 million euro tax bill, which he was ordered to pay by the Supreme Court just last year. And following this, UK MPs are pushing for further investigations into Abramovich, with estimates that he may owe over £1 billion in unpaid UK taxes alone. Now, I think the Abramovich case study highlights how complex yet crucial uncovering true ownership can be. But the next question I think we should ask ourselves is, who should care? So we're going to open up another quick poll to see what people think. And again, I'll be relying on Thorsten to let me know
Yep.
how that's
I will
going.
keep you updated. The poll is coming. So why should you care about uncovering true ownership? Results are still coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had an answer in mind that will be chosen by the majority.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 88% or close to 90%, all of the above.
Right.
We have tax authorities and some clicks on law enforcement and financial institutions.
Yeah.
So
And
majority still all of the above.
Yeah, and they're all the right answer, really. I think the answer is who should care? Anyone with an invested interest in upholding financial integrity. So banks, for example, risk being exploited for money laundering. Governments lose revenue to fraud and tax evasion. And organizations awarding contracts must ensure that public funds don't end up in the wrong hands. And it's great to see around the world this collaborative effort around strengthening regulations, resulting in better law enforcement collaboration and increased data sharing between financial institutions and regulators and governments. And these efforts are critical, but they also come with a challenge, which is that with more data comes more complexity. And each new data source adds to the complexity. And this is where I think graph technology comes into play. Because without graph technology, tracing ownership often means manually connecting data across multiple tables. So writing complex join operations, dealing with the slow performance as a result, because relational databases simply weren't built for this kind of work at scale. Now, when we look at the timeline of ICIJ's investigations into UBO networks, we see that they have been using the Neo4j native graph database for over a decade. So as a native graph database, Neo4j stores information as a network of connected data points rather than in the tables that we typically see in a relational database. So this diagram represents how data is structured in a graph, where entities like people and trusts and companies are stored as nodes, and their connections, such as ownership, are stored as relationships. And the equivalent of this in a relational database would be a table join. But in a graph, these relationships are explicitly stored as part of the data model. Additionally, both nodes and relationships can have properties or attributes that capture further detail, such as temporal or geospatial data, allowing for richer data representation within the graph format itself. So we mentioned that graph databases are more performant than relational databases for this sort of problem. But why is that? And the answer is that in a relational database, relationships between entities, such as companies and their owners, are stored in tables. And retrieving connections beyond the first layer requires a table join, which means performing an index lookup. And if we then want to see who the controlled companies of those controlled companies are, another table join is needed, which triggers yet another index lookup. And this isn't so much of a problem for one or two joins, but as we expand to multiple layers, tracing ownership across complex structures, the dataset grows exponentially. And each additional join slows the query down significantly, making it difficult to scale. But in contrast, graph databases don't compute these joins on the fly because relationships are persisted as first-class structures. And this allows for direct traversal without costly index lookups. So whether that's 2 hops or 10 hops, performance remains stable, making graphs ideal for deep relationship queries needed in UBO investigations or network analysis. I think the biggest light bulb moment I had for graph is understanding this concept that table joins are persisted by storing the data in a graph format. Now, Neo4j provides a strong foundation for connected data with secure and native graph querying capabilities. And GraphAware builds on top of this with its government-grade data analytics platform, so GraphAware Hume, which sits on top of the Neo4j database to help organizations operationalize graph intelligence quickly and at scale. So with Hume, we can take data from disparate data sources, as we mentioned earlier, and combine them into the one Neo4j database, both through real-time and scheduled data ingestion patterns. We can also orchestrate graph queries that happen after the data ingestion phase. And then we have the ability to set up interactive dashboards that integrate both graph and non-graph visualizations, provide the ability for real-time alerting, and provide the ability for graph editing with approval workflows. And GraphAware Hume also integrates or can allow users to integrate LLMs with Neo4j, helping structure unstructured data and powering chatbots that are capable of retrieving insights from the graph. So by combining Neo4j's native graph database technology with Hume's extended capabilities, organizations can maximize the value of their connected data. Now, for the remainder of this presentation, we'll delve into a quick demo showcasing how GraphAware Hume and Neo4j reveal insights into UBO networks and advanced analysis techniques. But before we start the demo, let's open up another quick poll. I'd love to see which aspects of the graph approaches might interest you the most.
Yeah, the poll is running. Yeah, the first results are coming in. It's still counting. The numbers are changing. That's interesting. So we have 40%, a little bit more on detecting multi-hop patterns. Then we have number 2, 26% graph AI insights, roughly 20% on visualizing networks, and still 14% with being able to talk to the data.
Awesome. Okay, that's very interesting to me. Thank you for that, Thorsten, and everyone for participating in the polls. All right, so we'll start our demo. So one major challenge in these investigations is that data is often scattered across multiple different data sources. So, for example, both structured records through official channels, and then also, for example, leaked documents that could be unstructured data like the Pandora Papers. And without linking and unifying entities, networks remain fragmented. And so it's important for us to perform reliable entity resolution to arrive at a complete view of networks. And for this, we do actually partner with a company called Senzing, which offers purpose-built real-time AI for entity resolution. And to illustrate the value of entity resolution, we'll go through a simple example. So here we can see two distinct entities in GraphAware's Hume platform, Alex M and Alexander Martin. And at first glance, they appear to be separate individuals, so each owning a different set of companies. But when we look closer at their addresses, we see that both are linked to the same location, which we can tell from their address relationships pointing to the same address node. And the same pattern emerges when we check their associated bank accounts. So both are tied to the same account. And this quickly tells us that despite the slight differences in their names, these two entities represent the same individual. And resolving these entities is crucial because each one has its own set of relationships that need to be consolidated. And with GraphAware Hume, we can visualize these entities being merged into a single unified record. Now, instead of two separate nodes, we now see Martin as a grouped entity containing both identities and inheriting all previously disconnected relationships, ensuring we get a complete view of the network. Now, we can also use Hume to visualize and gain insights into UBO structures, leveraging Neo4j's graph capabilities to trace and connect entities. And understanding who truly controls an entity is essential for exposing hidden risks, ensuring regulatory compliance, and detecting financial misconduct. Ownership chains often span multiple layers, as we saw in the Abramovich network, where assets were hidden behind offshore trusts and corporate structures. And in this next recording, we'll see how GraphAware Hume brings these insights to the surface by visualizing both the direct and the indirect ownership relationships. So here we're running an action in Hume that expands the full network of Martin, revealing how the ownership chain extends multiple hops away from him. And by expanding along the UBO relationship from Alex, we see that he is identified as the UBO of all these entities. And what's powerful about this is that we can persist this information, allowing us to potentially model different ownership mapping rules and retrieve all entities that he is a UBO of in just one hop rather than traversing multiple layers every time. And we can also inspect the UBO relationship itself, as we saw earlier, and view the properties stored there. And we saw that the relationship had a start and end date properties, which capture the temporal nature of these relationships as they evolve over time. Now, we can also use GraphAware Hume to uncover the flow of illicit funds within UBO networks and classify different fraud typologies. So money laundering networks are often designed to obscure the origin of funds using techniques like layering and round tripping and restructuring to disguise illicit transactions. And by analyzing financial movements in the graph and overlaying that with the UBO network, we can identify critical pathways and patterns that indicate potential financial crime. So in this next recording, we'll see how Hume helps surface these insights by visualizing the movement of funds and tracing them back to their UBOs and categorizing transactions into distinct fraud typologies that warrant further scrutiny. So here we're running another action in Hume to explore how money layering appears in the graph. Now, the animated green relationship represents the movement of funds between bank accounts, And when we expand these accounts out, we see that they are linked to different entities, yet all ultimately trace back to Martin as the UBO. So running another action reveals an example of money round tripping, where we can see clearly why it's called that. I mean, the flow of funds forms a circular pattern. Now, in expanding, the associated bank accounts show that despite the movement, all entities involved still connect back to the one UBO, so Leo Smith in this example. And this highlights how transactions can remain within the same UBO network, even when the UBO isn't directly involved in each step. And then running another action uncovers a different fraud topology again, so money structuring or restructuring. And here we see an entity making 10 separate transactions between accounts. However, when we examine the ownership of these accounts, they all tie back to the same UBO, Ryan Ward. And this is a common tactic used to avoid crossing regulatory thresholds by breaking a large payment into smaller amounts made in quick succession, something that can warrant further scrutiny. And we can also overlay these different types of fraudulent financial transactions across the entire UBO networks to compare them visually and understand how they operate. And each of these techniques serves the same goal, which is to conceal the origin of the funds while ensuring that they end up where they were intended. Now, we can also use Hume to evaluate risk by leveraging graph data science algorithms provided by the Neo4j database to detect high-risk entities based on shared patterns and connections in the graph. So fraudulent activity often follows recognizable structures. And by identifying individuals with similar network behaviors, we can proactively assess their risk level. So in this next recording, we'll see how we can use graph data science algorithms to generate similarity scores to help us quantify these risks. And so if we have a confirmed bad actor with a highly connected network, we can use these similarity scores to flag others with similar structures for further investigation. So here we're running another action to identify other individuals with similar network patterns to a given person using graph data science algorithms. And here we see similarity scores between, for example, Martin and the other UBOs with connections exceeding 80% similar. And these similarity scores can serve as a risk measure. So if Martin has been confirmed to be involved in fraudulent activity, we can use these scores to assess the risk level of others whose networks share a high percentage similarity with his. And beyond this, we can track how these networks change over time. So comparing Martin's network in April to his network in March, for example. And I raise that because, as we saw in the Abramovich case study, even within the same network, temporal shifts can signal potentially suspicious activity. And these techniques provide a means of bringing that to our attention. Now, let's talk about Hume and how it provides the opportunity to interact with your graph. So by coordinating interactions between large language models, such as Copilot and the knowledge graph itself that's stored in the Neo4j graph database. So while Hume doesn't come with an out-of-the-box chatbot tailored to individual graphs, it does provide the tools to build one. And these tools are still evolving, as this is an active area of experimentation and research. But they offer a foundation for developing a chatbot that can dynamically query the graph and retrieve relevant insights. So we'll go through another recording now. So here, I'm going to open up Hume Maestro, which is Hume's inbuilt chatbot that we can customize. And here I'm asking, what entities does Alex Martin own either directly or indirectly? And when we send off that request, the chatbot first extracts the key concepts from that question. So for example, identifying Martin as the key entity. It then retrieves the relevant subgraph, which can span multiple hops from Alex, and sends that along with the user's question to the LLM. And now we can see that it's generated an answer, listing the entities Martin is a UBO of, along with his ownership percentages, whether that be directly or indirect ownerships. Now, if we ask another question, like list out the temporal evolution of Alex Martin's ownership chain, grouped by date in chronological order, and submit that to the chatbot will follow the same process. So we'll leverage GraphRag techniques to retrieve the relevant context to answer the user's question. And we can see here that it's provided a timeline of Martin's ownership chain evolution. Now we can also ask it another question. We can ask it about whether there's any fraudulent transactions related to Martin's ownership chain evolution or Martin's ownership network. So we saw earlier in the example that he followed that money layering example. So we're going to see if the chatbot is able to dig into the knowledge graph and determine whether it can identify it. So here we see, yep, it confirmed that fraudulent transactions exist and identifies the fraud typology as layering and provides details such as timestamps and transaction amounts and the entities involved. And this takes us to the end of this presentation. So we'll shortly be opening up the floor for further questions that people may have. But before that, we would all like to thank you for your time today. We hope that these presentations have provided some insights into the sorts of financial crime challenges that graph technology is actively addressing. And for those who are interested in learning more about Neo4j and GraphAware, we'll be leaving this slide open here. So please reach out if you'd like to stay connected and feel free to scan the QR codes for further reading in this space. So I'll now pass over to Thorsten to lead the Q&A session. Thank you, Thorsten.
Thank you, Imran. And as said in the beginning, you will receive the recording afterwards during this week. And there are some more links to dedicated information on financial crime and how to investigate in this area. And yes, please use the Q&A section. And so we have the first question. Does Neo4j allow merging relationships that each represent a money value and then automatically calculating total transfer amount between two entities?
Would you like to answer that, Thorsten, or I can answer that?
You can answer that.
Yeah, sure. Go for it. Yep, I'll do that. All right. So the ability to do that is definitely there. So it requires writing a Cypher query to perform that aggregation, but you're definitely able to do that. And I might further add as well. So what I think GraphAware Hume does well is we saw examples of actions through those recordings, and what actions are essentially pre-written Cypher queries. So, for example, if we want to perform that sort of aggregation raised in the question, that can be stored as an action in GraphAware Hume. That will query the Neo4j database. But it essentially allows us to not have to re-type out that Cypher query every time we want to get that insight. We can press the play button on that action and get the results that way.
Okay, next question for you from Sweden. It seems like the quality of the data is crucial. So how old is ownership data? Who is accountable of the content? In Sweden, approximately 60% of companies has reported UBO, whereof approx 50% is wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yes.
I think it ties back to that. I think a lot of organizations across the globe are realizing that. That's very true. And I can see several examples where organizations are looking to strengthen regulations and increase collaboration between agencies to combat this and improve the quality of the data. So it's not only data sharing, it's also putting measures in place to record and capture data and ensure that the quality is there. But absolutely, the quality of the outcomes depends on the quality of the data.
Okay. So if you have another question, we will keep the webinar open for a few more minutes. Otherwise, if I don't see any further questions from your side, many thanks for being our guest today. And if you need more information, if you want to learn more about Neo4j GraphAware and the capabilities we offer to you, download the content, or just the easiest way, drop us a message at dan@graphaware.com, or to myself, Thorsten Stockmann at Neo4j.com. And in case I can't, or Dan, the GraphAware is not able to answer the question, we will find someone who is able to answer the question, leveraging our graph technology. Another question, yes. How do you prevent the chatbot to be treated as a solve now button? That's interesting.
As a solve now button?
Solve now button.
I'm not sure I understand what solve now means.
Yeah.
Can you provide further context to that? I think it's a really interesting question, but I'm just not sure if I understand it.
Yeah, please refine the question. And meanwhile, we go to the next one. You showed the financial flows data. Often they come in different formats. Do GraphAware normalizing the data, or is another data transformation needed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the GraphAware Hume platform, in the process of allowing users to synthesize data, so take data from disparate data sources and combine that into the single Neo4j data store, it provides something called Hume Orchestra, which essentially is like a data pipelining tool. So it allows you to extract the data from the data sources, but also apply the transformation steps to that data to normalize that data, for example, before loading it into the Neo4j database. So that's a capability that we're really proud of with GraphAware Hume, that orchestration capability.
Thanks. Okay.
Is there any further context on the solve?
Yeah. We asked for a few more details. Solve now means a lot of law enforcement people always ask for a solve now button when investigating crimes. That button would theoretically allow to say who did the crime straight away by analyzing it all automatically.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So I think that touches on a really interesting point. So I think with technology, graph analytics, AI in general, I think there's a risk in solely trusting these technologies to, as you say, solve the problem without that sort of manual intervention step. So how I view this technology is it's a way for us to quickly narrow in on potentially, and I say potentially with emphasis, fraudulent or criminal activity. And then essentially you still have that manual intervention step, which supports further investigation. So the idea is that we're trying to increase the strike rate of investigations rather than say, this is Big Brother and it's going to decide for us. I think I do agree with you that there's perhaps that maybe a natural thought trail that takes us down that road where, this could actually be used in a way that it's not intended to, where it's like that solve now button. But I think it just relies on us all to communicate the dangers or the risks of relying in that way. So we saw examples of using graph data science algorithms to identify other similar UBO networks that are similar to sort of confirmed fraudulent entities or bad actors. And the idea there is we're not necessarily saying that those other entities are definitely fraudulent. We're saying that they're high-risk entities. And the evidence provided is the data that we have in the graph network. But I think a lot of the times when it comes to confirming whether criminal activity is actually at play, it requires additional data, additional follow-ups that may not even actually be in the knowledge graph itself. So solely relying on that piece of the data can be quite risky.
We have two more questions. The first one is, what would be main challenges to using these techniques to other areas of risk? The
main challenges
for other areas of risk. thinking about the data model and having the right ontology. Yeah, this is also from other customers. It's thinking about the ontology.
Yeah. And Neo4j, something I really love about the Neo4j database is that it provides a schema flexible setup where you don't necessarily have to have the schema, the graph data model defined in advance, because typically in these sort of data sort of initiatives, requirements and thoughts evolve over time, and the ability for Neo4j to have that schema flexible data model, which allows us to iteratively edit the schema on the fly, is a really powerful technique to addressing that challenge. But certainly that is a challenge, that certainly forming that data model and that schema. And really taking the data from multiple different data sources, like we talked about how, that setup, we're talking about potentially, having different data connectors, maybe Kafka, maybe sort of schedule loads. And each data source has the opportunity to introduce the same entity, but in a slightly, with slightly different properties, for example. And so they appear as different entities. And so a real challenge there is to perform that entity resolution, right? And just keeping that in mind. And I think with Hume Orchestra, the ability to have that ability to do the transformations and perform the entity resolution step in that phase is really useful.
Yeah, the next question is, how do you deal with false alerts? And this is something I know from a customer it's a bank, and it's that the field is around sanction circumvention. And in the past, they put a lot of effort in investigation, and they had a high number of false alerts. Yeah, and now they are responding with the Neo4j and the graph technology. They have less false alerts. Yeah, and they have the ability to put their time into the right fields of investigation, so to say.
Yeah, I think this is a really common problem in predictive modeling, that trade-off between precision and recall. So we want to make sure that we're capturing all the crime that's really there, but at the same time, if we widen the pool too much, the strike rate, that precision drops. And that's that common ongoing battle, that trade-off. So I think there is no easy solution for that, but I would say that if it's bringing back too many things to look at, there are techniques that can be put in place to prioritize precision over recall, so prioritize that strike rate, and that involves higher thresholds. So yes, these other entities are similar, but we're going to only look at the ones that are like the top 3 most similar, for example, because that's what we have manual resources to dedicate to that kind of investigation. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. How are you dealing with object duplicates? For example, the same person can be written differently in different data sources, which often happens for Russian and Chinese names, which will lead to create different objects from different data sources.
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's referring to entity resolution. We partner with a company called Sensing, and they have a really, really great entity resolution product that is capable of addressing different language, sort of, the same person is in this language and in this language, but they need to be matched as one entity. So to answer your question, it deserves an entity resolution step in the process. We integrate that step as part of the Hume Orchestra workflow, that sort of orchestration, that data pipelining step. These products are quite mature, so they'll be able to address that kind of problem.
Okay, the last question before we end the webinar of today. GraphAware, that's a direct question. Do you only work with authorities or also with smaller RegTech companies?
Oh, we are open to working with everyone. So we have different types of, we work with different types of agencies and organizations. So it's not just law enforcement or taxation use case. It's a wide variety.
Okay, thank you, Imran, and thanks to everyone for your interest, for being with us today and asking a lot of questions, nice questions. And yeah, please feel free to get in contact with us afterwards. And as said, you will get the recording and additional information afterwards during the weeks. So from our side, the only thing we can add is thank you very much and have a nice day wherever you are. Till next time. See you. Bye-bye.